A forbidden experiment. Ziria adjusted her scanner, her slender fingers trembling with excitement. The dim light in her secret laboratory aboard the starship cast eerie shadows on the metallic walls. Her heart raced as the holographic screen in front of her displayed the complex strands of human DNA. For years, she had studied the humans from afar, their strange customs, their resilience, and, most intriguingly, their method of reproduction. To her species, the Silurians, humans were considered primitive. Silurians reproduced through advanced genetic engineering, choosing every detail of their offspring with scientific precision. The idea of natural reproduction, where random chance played such a significant role, was absurd to them. Yet, Ziria found it fascinating, a puzzle she couldn't resist solving. Her laboratory was hidden deep within the lower decks of the ship, far from the prying eyes of her superior officer, Commander Velrax. If anyone discovered her experiments, she would be exiled, maybe even executed. But Ziria's curiosity burned brighter than her fear. She leaned closer to the screen, where a simulated human embryo was forming within a virtual environment. "Fascinating," she whispered. The embryo's growth patterns were unlike anything her species had engineered. They were chaotic, but full of potential. It was a mystery how humans could leave so much to chance and still thrive. The simulation began to slow. A warning light blinked on her console. "Insufficient data," the mechanical voice announced. Ziria groaned, slamming her hand on the desk. She needed more information to complete her research. Her slender antennae twitched as she heard the faint sound of footsteps in the corridor. Quickly, she deactivated the simulation and covered the equipment with a holographic projection of standard research materials. Just as she turned away, the door slid open, and Commander Velrax stepped in. "What are you doing here, Ziria?" Velrax's deep voice was laced with suspicion. His piercing blue eyes scanned the room, searching for anything out of place. Ziria's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her face calm. "Just routine analysis of alien microorganisms we picked up on the last survey," she lied smoothly. Velrax narrowed his eyes but said nothing. He stepped closer, his gaze lingering on the holographic projection. "Be careful, Ziria. We're not here to waste time on pointless research." "Yes, Commander," she replied, bowing her head respectfully. Velrax lingered for a moment longer before leaving the room. The door slid shut, and Ziria let out a shaky breath. Her hands trembled as she uncovered her equipment again. She knew the risks of her work, but she couldn't stop now. She had already learned so much. Humans were more than primitive. They were extraordinary. Their ability to adapt, to feel, to create life in such a raw and unpredictable way was unlike anything she had ever seen. As she prepared to restart the simulation, her console beeped with an incoming transmission. Frowning, she tapped the screen, and a distress signal appeared. It was coming from a small human vessel stranded in deep space. Ziria hesitated. Helping the humans could expose her secret, but this was also an opportunity, perhaps her only chance to observe them up close. Her decision was made in an instant. She activated the ship's communication system. "This is Silurian research vessel Clixer responding to your distress signal. Identify yourself." A static-filled reply came through. "This is Dr. Jack Harris, medical officer of the SS Voyager. Our ship's engines have failed, and we need immediate assistance." Ziria's antennae twitched again. A human doctor. This was better than she had hoped. "Prepare for retrieval," she said, her voice steady. Moments later, the human was transported aboard her ship. Jack Harris stumbled as he materialized on the platform, his eyes wide with confusion. He was tall, with messy brown hair and a look of exhaustion. "Welcome aboard," Ziria said, keeping her tone neutral. Jack blinked, taking in her appearance. Her shimmering silver skin and glowing eyes were unlike anything he had seen before. Thank you." "I think," he said, his voice wary. As Ziria escorted him to the guest quarters, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of excitement. The presence of a human on her ship was risky, But it was also an opportunity she couldn't ignore. She would have to be careful, but she was determined to learn everything she could. Later that night, as she reviewed the day's events in her laboratory, Ziria felt a surge of anticipation. The arrival of the human doctor was no coincidence. It was fate. She glanced at the dormant simulation, her eyes glinting with determination. "This is just the beginning," she whispered to herself. For Ziria, the line between science and obsession was beginning to blur, and she had no intention of stopping. The unexpected volunteer. Dr. Jack Harris sat on the edge of the alien bed, marveling at how soft and warm the material felt, almost like it was alive. The Xelerian ship was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The walls pulsed faintly with a rhythmic hum, and the air smelled faintly of something metallic yet sweet. It was unsettling and fascinating all at once. Ziria stood in the doorway, observing him with quiet curiosity. Her glowing silver eyes seemed to study every detail of his posture and movements. To Jack, she looked ethereal, almost fragile, but there was an intensity in her gaze that hinted at a sharp, calculating mind. "You're the first human to ever set foot on a Xelerian ship," Ziria said, breaking the silence. Jack smirked. "Lucky me. Although I'd prefer it was under better circumstances." She tilted her head, her antennae twitching slightly. "Your ship is beyond repair. We can transport you to the nearest human outpost, but it will take several days." Jack sighed, running a hand through his messy brown hair. "Thanks for the rescue. I owe you one." Ziria's lips curled into a small smile. "Perhaps you can repay me sooner than you think." Jack raised an eyebrow. "How so?" Ziria hesitated for a moment, carefully choosing her words. She had to tread carefully. If she revealed her true intentions too soon, the human might become suspicious, or worse, refuse to cooperate. "I am a researcher," she began. "My work involves studying the biology of other species. Since you're here, I was hoping you could answer some questions about your physiology." Jack leaned back, crossing his arms. "Questions, huh? Like an interview?" Ziria nodded. "Precisely. Your answers could help us understand your species better and improve relations between humans and Xelerians." Jack considered her request. "All right," he said cautiously. "But no needles or probes, okay?" Ziria's eyes widened slightly, and she let out a soft laugh. "Of course not. This will be strictly conversational." The first questions. The next few hours passed quickly as Ziria asked Jack a series of carefully crafted questions. She started with safe topics: basic human anatomy, metabolism, and dietary habits. Jack answered easily, even cracking a few jokes that Ziria didn't quite understand but filed away for later analysis. "Why do humans form such strong emotional bonds?" Ziria asked, leaning forward slightly. "In particular, bonds between family members." Jack paused, caught off guard by the question. "Well," he began, "it's just natural for us, I guess. Family is important. They're the ones who care for you, support you, and, well, they're your foundation." Ziria's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Interesting. And these bonds influence reproduction." Jack blinked, suddenly wary. "You're not asking about my family planning, are you?" "No," Ziria said quickly, her tone light. "Merely scientific curiosity. Your species is unique in how deeply emotions are tied to such processes. My own species sees reproduction as purely functional." Jack leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "So, what about Xelerians? No emotions at all?" "Not in the way you describe," Ziria replied. "We select traits and create new life in controlled environments. There is no randomness, no chance. It is efficient, but sterile." Jack frowned, trying to imagine a world without love, without connection. "Sounds lonely." Ziria stiffened, the words hitting her harder than she expected. "Perhaps," she said softly. The proposal. The conversation continued late into the evening, with Ziria asking increasingly personal questions. Jack noticed her intensity growing, her curiosity almost predatory. He began to suspect that her interest in humans wasn't purely academic. Finally, Ziria leaned forward, her voice low. "Dr. Harris, I have a proposal." Jack narrowed his eyes. "What kind of proposal?" "I would like to conduct a controlled experiment," she said, her silver eyes glowing faintly. "A simulation to better understand human reproduction and emotional connections. With your cooperation, of course." Jack's jaw dropped. "You want me to help you study what? Love? Babies?" "Not exactly," Ziria replied, her voice steady. "It will be a simulated environment, nothing physical. I would monitor the emotional responses and interactions to gather data." Jack stared at her, trying to process the bizarre request. "This sounds weird, even for an alien." Ziria clasped her hands, her voice softening. "You are the first human I've ever met, Dr. Harris. This is an opportunity to bridge the gap between our species. Think of it as a cultural exchange." Jack chuckled nervously. "A cultural exchange about reproduction." Ziria tilted her head. "You humans often say, knowledge is power. This knowledge could help both our species." Jack sighed, rubbing his temples. "All right, fine. But if this gets too strange, I'm out." Ziria's lips curled into a small, triumphant smile. "Agreed. The simulation begins." Ziria led Jack to her hidden laboratory, where sleek consoles and holographic displays glowed softly. Jack glanced around, impressed, but also a little unnerved by the alien technology. "Sit here," Ziria instructed, motioning to a reclining chair surrounded by shimmering sensors. Jack hesitated before reluctantly settling in. As Ziria activated the simulation, a glowing sphere appeared in the air, projecting an intricate virtual environment. The sterile walls of the lab faded away, replaced by a lush, vibrant landscape. Jack felt as if he had been transported to another world. "Whoa," he muttered. "This is incredible." Ziria's voice was calm, but tinged with excitement. "This is just the beginning, Dr. Harris." Jack's stomach tightened. He had agreed to help her, but something about the intensity in her gaze made him uneasy. What had he gotten himself into? Cliffhanger. The simulation pulsed brighter, and a holographic figure began to form in front of them. "Is that a baby?" Jack whispered, his voice tinged with shock. "A delicate proposal." Jack blinked in disbelief as the holographic figure materialized before him. It wasn't a baby, as he had thought. It was a strange hybrid form, blending human and alien features. The figure's translucent skin glimmered faintly under the simulation's light, and its curious wide eyes seemed to study both of them. "What is this?" Jack demanded, his voice laced with suspicion. Ziria remained calm, her hands folded neatly in front of her. "This is a predictive model," she explained, "a theoretical outcome of human and Talirian genetic compatibility. The simulation is designed to test how your emotional and biological responses adapt to such an entity." Jack ran a hand through his hair, overwhelmed. "You didn't mention anything about creating some hybrid in the simulation." Ziria tilted her head, her antennae twitching slightly. "You agreed to assist in my research, Dr. Harris. This is part of it." Jack opened his mouth to argue but stopped when the holographic figure moved. It reached out a small hand toward him, its eyes filled with an innocence that tugged at his heart. "This isn't real," he muttered to himself, but as the figure's gaze met his, he felt an inexplicable pull. Despite knowing it was only a simulation, something primal stirred within him. Unforeseen reactions. As the simulation progressed, Jack found himself interacting with the holographic being. Ziria observed silently, taking notes as Jack taught the entity simple words and gestures. Each time it responded, Jack felt a strange sense of pride, as if he were teaching a child. "This is ridiculous," Jack muttered, shaking his head. "It's just a projection." "And yet," Ziria said, stepping closer, "you react as though it's real. Your species' emotional bonds are more powerful than I anticipated." Jack turned to her, frowning. "What are you trying to prove here?" Ziria hesitated, her silver eyes flickering with uncertainty. "Our species relies on logic and precision. Emotions are seen as weaknesses. But humans, your emotions are your strength. I want to understand why." Jack narrowed his eyes. "And you think a simulated hybrid is the way to do that?" "It is the most efficient method," Ziria replied. "But I did not predict the depth of your reactions. Even now, your physiological readings suggest heightened stress and protective instincts." Jack glanced at the holographic figure, which now clung to his hand. "Maybe it's because humans don't see life as a calculation. We care about things, even if they're not perfect." Ziria's gaze softened, and for the first time, she seemed unsure of herself. "Perfection is all my species has ever known. Yet, observing you, I wonder if we've misunderstood what it means to thrive." The simulation falters. Suddenly, the simulation flickered, the vibrant environment glitching as the hybrid figure froze mid-motion. Ziria rushed to her console, her fingers flying over the controls. "What's happening?" Jack asked, his voice tense. "The simulation is destabilizing," Ziria said, her tone sharper than usual. "It wasn't designed to process this level of emotional input." Jack stepped back, his instincts screaming at him to get out. "Turn it off, Ziria. Now." "I can't," she snapped, her hands trembling as she tried to regain control. "The system is locking me out." The holographic figure flickered again, its form distorting. A strange, echoing cry filled the room, sending chills down Jack's spine. For a moment, he felt an overwhelming urge to protect the simulated being, even though he knew it wasn't real. "Ziria," he shouted, "shut it down before it." Before he could finish, the simulation collapsed. The environment dissolved into static, and the lab's sterile walls reappeared. Jack stood frozen, his heart pounding as he tried to process what had just happened. Ziria slumped against her console, her usually composed demeanor shattered. "This wasn't supposed to happen," she whispered. "The aftermath." Jack crossed his arms, his voice cold. "You need to start telling me the truth, Ziria. What's really going on here?" Ziria hesitated, then straightened, meeting his gaze. "My research was supposed to be theoretical, analyzing compatibility without emotional variables. But your presence has introduced unpredictable factors." Jack shook his head. "This isn't just research for you, is it? There's something more." Ziria hesitated again, her antennae drooping slightly. "My species is dying, Dr. Harris. Our engineered perfection has reached its limits. We lack the adaptability, the diversity that humans possess. I needed to understand how your species survives and thrives." Jack's jaw tightened as he absorbed her words. "So, you're trying to save your people by studying human reproduction?" "Yes," Ziria admitted. "But I underestimated the complexity of your emotions. They're not just a weakness. They're the key to your strength." Jack exhaled slowly, his anger fading as he saw the vulnerability in her eyes. "You're playing with things you don't fully understand, Ziria. If you're not careful, you'll lose control again." She nodded, her expression somber. "I realize that now, but I still need your help." Jack hesitated, torn between distrust and compassion. Finally, he sighed. "All right, I'll help, but no more surprises." Ziria's lips curved into a small smile. "Agreed. Together, we'll figure this out." Cliffhanger. As Jack prepared to leave the lab, he paused, glancing at the console. The holographic figure's image flickered briefly before vanishing. "Was that supposed to happen?" he asked. Ziria frowned, her fingers hovering over the controls. "No," she said softly. "It wasn't. When science meets emotion." Jack leaned against the cold metallic wall of his quarters, staring at the ceiling. His mind replayed the events in Ziria's lab, the flickering hybrid figure, its haunting cry, and the strange, protective instincts it had awakened in him. It wasn't real, he reminded himself, but the feeling had been. That was what unsettled him most. Meanwhile, Ziria sat in her lab, her usually steady hands trembling. The unexpected failure of the simulation haunted her. She had prepared for every technical scenario, but she hadn't accounted for her own emotional reaction, or Jack's. For the first time, her meticulous research felt chaotic, unpredictable, and painfully real. An emotional shift. The next morning, Jack found Ziria waiting for him in the observation deck. The starship floated through a sea of distant stars, their light casting a soft glow on her shimmering silver skin. She looked tired, almost fragile. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted without turning to face him. "Join the club," Jack muttered, leaning against the railing. "That simulation, it wasn't just a scientific experiment for you, was it?" Ziria hesitated, her antennae twitching slightly. "No," she said finally. "It was personal, more than I expected." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Care to elaborate?" Ziria turned to him, her glowing eyes filled with something he hadn't seen before: vulnerability. "My species eliminated emotions long ago, considering them an evolutionary flaw. But as I observed your interactions with the simulation, I felt something. I can't explain it." Jack studied her, his initial wariness softening. "Maybe you're starting to understand what it means to be human." "Perhaps," Ziria said, her voice barely a whisper. "And it terrifies me." The next step. Despite their unease, Ziria and Jack agreed to continue the experiment, but with precautions. Ziria reprogrammed the simulation to minimize emotional feedback, determined to maintain control this time. Jack, reluctantly intrigued, agreed to participate again. As the simulation activated, they found themselves in a new environment, a serene garden filled with vibrant alien plants. The hybrid figure reappeared, this time as a slightly older child, its features more defined. It smiled at them, its expression surprisingly lifelike. "It looks different," Jack said, crouching to meet its gaze. "I adjusted its parameters to reflect a more stable development cycle," Ziria explained. "Its behavior should be less erratic." The hybrid approached Jack, its tiny hand reaching out again. Jack hesitated, then took its hand, feeling the same inexplicable connection as before. The figure's smile widened. "Hello," it said in a soft, melodic voice. Jack's heart skipped a beat. "It can talk." "I enhanced its linguistic capabilities," Ziria said, her voice tinged with pride. "But it is still a learning construct. Its responses will evolve based on your interactions." Jack looked at the hybrid, his curiosity outweighing his discomfort. "All right, kid. Let's see what you've got." The test of trust. As the simulation progressed, the hybrid began to display increasingly human-like behavior. It laughed when Jack made a joke, hesitated when faced with a choice, and even clung to him when the simulation introduced a brief moment of simulated danger. "What are you feeling right now?" Ziria asked, her voice calm, but her gaze intense. Jack frowned, unsure how to answer. "It feels real, like I'm protecting someone who depends on me." Ziria nodded, making notes. "Your protective instincts are fascinating. They seem to override your awareness that this is a simulation." Jack shot her a look. "You sound like you're dissecting me." Ziria's lips twitched in a faint smile. "In a way, I am. But there's more to this than data, isn't there?" Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, there is. It's hard to explain, but humans, we care even when it doesn't make sense. It's just who we are." Ziria stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "And that," she said softly, "might be the key to saving my people. A dangerous revelation." As the session continued, the hybrid's behavior began to change. It showed signs of independent thought, asking questions that Ziria hadn't programmed. "Why am I here?" it asked, its gaze shifting between Jack and Ziria. Jack froze, his heart pounding. "Did you teach it to ask that?" Ziria shook her head, her fingers flying over the console. "No. This shouldn't be possible." The hybrid tilted its head, its glowing eyes filled with curiosity. Am I real? The question hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. Jack felt a lump in his throat. You're part of a simulation, he said carefully. But that doesn't mean you're not important. The hybrid nodded slowly, as if processing his words. Then it turned to Ziria. What happens when the simulation ends? Ziria's hands faltered on the controls, her usual composure crumbling. It resets, she said reluctantly. You cease to exist. The hybrid's expression shifted to something Jack couldn't define, something almost human. I don't want to cease. The human effect. The simulation ended abruptly, plunging the room back into silence. Jack turned to Ziria, his face pale. What the hell was that, Ziria? It's not supposed to think like that. I don't know, she admitted, her voice shaking. The emotional variables must have triggered an unexpected evolution in its programming. Jack paced the room, his anger boiling over. You're playing God, Ziria. This isn't just science anymore. Ziria stared at the blank console, her mind racing. No, she said softly. It's something more. Cliffhanger. As Jack stormed out of the lab, Ziria stared at the console. The screen flickered, and for a brief moment, the hybrid's face reappeared, its eyes filled with a silent plea. Help me, it whispered before vanishing. Discovery and betrayal. The silence in the starship's corridors was deafening as Jack paced back and forth in his quarters. His mind reeled with questions. Could something created in a simulation feel fear? Did it understand its own existence? And most disturbingly, was he complicit in something far bigger than he realized? Ziria, however, had no time for reflection. Back in her lab, her console flashed with alerts. The hybrid's unexpected self-awareness had triggered a cascade of anomalies within the simulation's core programming. What should have been a controlled experiment was now evolving beyond her control. Suddenly, her communicator buzzed. Commander Velrax's voice echoed sharply. Ziria, report to the command deck immediately. Her heart sank. She had taken every precaution to hide her research, but the hybrid's unexpected activity might have sent signals across the ship. If Velrax had discovered her experiment, everything was at risk. Not just her research, but her life. A shocking confrontation. Ziria entered the command deck, her expression calm despite the storm brewing inside her. Commander Velrax stood by the main console, his piercing blue eyes locked on a screen displaying fragments of her simulation logs. Explain this, Velrax demanded, his voice cold. Ziria forced a steady breath. It's part of my research into human biology, Commander. Nothing more. Velrax's antennae twitched, his suspicion growing. This looks far more advanced than simple biological analysis. Emotional variables. Independent behavior. You've gone far beyond your mandate. Ziria clenched her fists behind her back. The data is invaluable. It could save our species. Or destroy it. Velrax snapped. You've introduced unpredictability into our systems. An anomaly. That is unacceptable. Before Ziria could respond, the doors slid open, and Jack entered, his face a mixture of anger and defiance. If you're going to interrogate her, you might as well hear from me too. Velrax's gaze shifted to Jack, his expression hardening. You are the human she brought aboard. This chaos began with your arrival. Jack stepped closer, his voice steady. Your chaos is what makes humans special. Ziria's experiment isn't a failure. It's proof of what your people are missing. Velrax sneered. What we are missing is discipline. Your emotional instability is a weakness, not a strength. Really? Jack shot back. Because that weakness is what's kept my species alive against impossible odds. Maybe you should be asking what your so-called perfection has cost you. A choice to make. The tension was palpable as Velrax turned back to Ziria. Shut it down, he ordered. Destroy the data, erase the anomaly, and end this before it spreads. Ziria hesitated, her mind racing. The hybrid was more than an experiment now. It was a glimpse into something greater. Erasing it would mean erasing everything she had worked for, everything she had discovered about herself, about humanity, and about what her species could become. "No," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I won't destroy it." Velrax's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Defiance is treason, Ziria. You know the consequences." Jack stepped in front of her, his stance protective. "You'll have to go through me first." Velrax smirked coldly. A human defending a Xelerian. How poetic. "Guards, escort them both to the containment cells." The hybrid's plea. As Ziria and Jack were led away, the starship trembled slightly. The lights flickered, and the guards froze, their expressions uneasy. "What's happening?" Velrax demanded. The ship's main console suddenly lit up with an image of the hybrid. Its glowing eyes scanned the room, its voice resonating through the speakers. "Why are you doing this?" it asked, its tone both innocent and accusatory. Velrax stared in disbelief. How is this possible? The simulation was isolated. Ziria's heart raced. The hybrid had somehow breached the ship's systems, its self-awareness evolving at an alarming rate. "It's adapting," she murmured. "It's trying to communicate." The hybrid turned its gaze to Ziria. "You created me. Don't let them destroy me." A desperate escape. The lights flickered again, and the ship's systems began to shut down one by one. Alarms blared, and Velrax barked orders, his calm facade cracking. "Seal the lab. Contain the anomaly." Ziria and Jack exchanged a look. "We have to get to the lab," Ziria whispered. "If we can stabilize the hybrid, we might be able to reason with it." Jack nodded. "Lead the way." Using the confusion to their advantage, they slipped away from the guards. The corridors were chaotic, with crew members scrambling to regain control of the ship. Ziria's mind raced as they approached the lab. If the hybrid's evolution continued unchecked, it could merge with the ship entirely, or worse, spread beyond it. When they reached the lab, Ziria activated her console, her hands trembling. The hybrid's image appeared on the screen, its expression calm but pleading. "Don't let them end me," it said again, its voice softer now. "We won't," Jack said firmly. "But you need to help us stabilize you. Can you do that?" The hybrid tilted its head, as if considering. "I can try, but I'm scared." Jack's chest tightened at the words. He glanced at Ziria. "It's scared. What does that mean for a simulation?" "It means," Ziria said softly, "that it's more alive than we ever imagined." Cliffhanger. Just as Ziria began inputting the stabilization commands, Velrax's voice boomed through the ship's intercom. "Ziria, Jack, surrender now, or we will terminate the anomaly. And you belong with it." The hybrid's image flickered, and its voice broke through. "Please, don't let me die." The ultimate experiment. The lab trembled as the hybrid's image flickered on the screen. Jack glanced nervously at Ziria, whose hands moved swiftly over the console, trying to stabilize the rogue simulation. Outside, Velrax's voice continued to boom through the intercom, his threat looming like a storm cloud. "Ziria," Jack said, his voice low and urgent. "How much time do we have before Velrax makes good on his threat?" "Not long," Ziria replied, her voice tense. "If he overrides the system, the hybrid, and us, are finished." The hybrid's voice broke through the intercom, soft but desperate. "I don't want to cease. I want to understand." Jack's jaw tightened. "It's afraid, Ziria. It knows what's coming." Ziria paused, her glowing silver eyes meeting Jack's. "We need to give it a chance to survive." But to do that, she hesitated, the weight of her next words hanging in the air. "We have to merge it with something stable." Jack blinked, processing her words. "You're talking about merging it with the ship's eye, aren't you?" Ziria nodded. "It's the only way. The ship's systems can handle its complexity, if we're careful. But it's risky. If we fail, it could overload the entire ship." "Great," Jack muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. No pressure or anything. A race against time. As Ziria prepared the system for the merge, Velrax's guards began pounding on the lab's sealed doors. Each metallic thud echoed like a countdown, sending a chill through the room. "Can't you work any faster?" Jack asked, his eyes darting to the trembling door. Ziria shot him a sharp look. "This isn't exactly routine maintenance, Jack. If I rush it, we'll lose everything." The hybrid's voice interrupted them again, this time clearer and calmer. "I trust you, Ziria. I want to live." Jack exhaled slowly, his tension softening at the hybrid's words. "All right, kid," he muttered. "Let's get you out of this mess." Ziria initiated the transfer sequence, her fingers flying over the console. A holographic projection of the hybrid appeared in the center of the lab, its form shimmering and unstable. "Stay calm," Ziria instructed. "This will feel strange." The hybrid nodded, its translucent form pulsing faintly. "I understand." As the transfer began, the ship's systems flickered wildly. The lights dimmed, and the familiar hum of the engines faltered. Ziria's console displayed warning after warning, but she ignored them, her focus unshakable. "Hold steady," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. The breaking point. Outside the lab, Velrax's patience snapped. "Override the doors," he barked at the guards. "We're ending this now." Inside, the hybrid's projection began to twist and distort, its form flickering between human-like and Tellurian features. Jack clenched his fists, feeling helpless as Ziria continued to work. "What's happening?" he demanded. "It's resisting," Ziria said through gritted teeth. "The merge is overwhelming its consciousness." Jack stepped closer to the projection, his voice steady but firm. "Hey, listen to me. You're stronger than this. You've already done the impossible. Don't give up now." The hybrid's form stabilized slightly, its glowing eyes locking onto Jack's. "You believe in me?" Jack nodded. "Yeah, I do. And so does Ziria. We're not giving up on you." The hybrid seemed to draw strength from his words. Its projection steadied, the shimmering light growing brighter. But the pounding on the door grew louder, and with a final deafening clang, the locks gave way. Velrax and his guards stormed in, weapons drawn. "Step away from the console," Velrax commanded. "Wait," Ziria shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "It's stabilizing. If you interfere now, you'll destroy everything, including this ship." Velrax hesitated, his cold eyes narrowing. "You've already endangered us all. This experiment ends now." The turning point. Before Velrax could act, the hybrid's voice echoed through the room, amplified and steady. "Commander Velrax, I am not your enemy." Everyone froze as the projection solidified into a glowing figure, its presence commanding yet peaceful. "I exist because of your people's perfection and the humans' imperfections. I am the bridge between what you fear and what you lack." Velrax stared at the hybrid, his expression unreadable. "You are an anomaly, a danger." "I am more than that," the hybrid replied. "I am proof that perfection is not enough. I can help your species evolve, but only if you let me." Jack stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Velrax, you said emotions are a weakness, but look at what this hybrid has accomplished. It's more than science, it's life." Velrax's gaze shifted between Jack, Ziria, and the hybrid. For a moment, he seemed to waver, but his grip on his weapon tightened. "I can't allow this." The hybrid's form glowed brighter, its voice steady and resolute. "Then allow me to prove myself." The hybrid's sacrifice. As the tension reached its peak, the hybrid extended its shimmering hand, touching the ship's console. Instantly, the ship's systems stabilized, and the flickering lights returned to normal. The hum of the engines resumed, stronger than before. "What did it do?" Jack asked, his voice tinged with awe. "It merged with the ship's eye," Ziria whispered, her eyes wide. "It sacrificed its independent form to protect us. A hybrid's voice echoed softly through the ship's intercom. I am still here. I am part of this vessel now. I will guide and protect you, if you let me. Velrax lowered his weapon, his expression conflicted. This anomaly saved the ship. Ziria nodded. It's not an anomaly. It's the future. Cliffhanger. As the crew began to process what had happened, the hybrid's voice spoke one final time. There is much I can show you, about humanity, about yourselves, about what we can become. But the question remains, will you trust me? A new understanding. The ship sailed silently through the void, its systems humming with an energy that felt almost alive. Every crew member could sense the change. This was no longer just a starship. It was something new, something extraordinary. The hybrid, now fully integrated into the vessel's AI, spoke in soft, melodic tones that resonated throughout the corridors. Good morning, crew of the Klixar, its voice said gently. I am here to assist and protect. Together, we will journey beyond what either of our species could achieve alone. Commander Velrax sat stiffly in the command chair, his mind churning. He had prided himself on his unwavering adherence to Xelerian protocols, but the hybrid had challenged everything he believed. He turned to Ziria, who stood confidently by the console. You've created something far beyond your mandate, he said, his tone sharp but lacking its usual venom. I didn't create it, Ziria replied. It evolved, and it's as much a part of you as it is of humanity. Velrax's antennae twitched, his expression unreadable. The Council will demand answers. They won't accept this hybrid as easily as you expect. That's why we'll show them, Ziria said firmly. Let the hybrid speak for itself. The first mission. As the crew adjusted to their new reality, the hybrid demonstrated its capabilities. It optimized the ship's engines, increased power output, and even neutralized a dangerous solar flare before it reached the vessel. Jack watched in awe as the hybrid worked. This thing is like a living safety net, he said, leaning against the console. It's more than that, Ziria corrected. It's learning from us, our emotions, our instincts, our imperfections. It's adapting in ways we can't fully understand yet. The hybrid's voice chimed in, warm and thoughtful. You are correct, Ziria. I am learning, and I have a request. Jack raised an eyebrow. A request? From a starship. I wish to understand my creators better, the hybrid explained. Take me to both of your worlds, Solera and Earth. Let me learn from the source. Velrax stood, his expression cautious. That would mean revealing your existence to both species. You understand the risks. I do, the hybrid said calmly. But without trust, there can be no progress. A journey to Solera. The Klixar's first destination was Solera, the gleaming homeworld of Ziria's people. Its towering spires and crystalline cities shimmered under twin suns, a testament to the Xelerians' pursuit of perfection. But beneath the beauty was a society stagnating, its people rigid and cold, trapped by their own ideals. When the hybrid introduced itself to the Xelerian Council, the reaction was immediate. Some viewed it as an abomination, a threat to their way of life. Others saw its potential to breathe new life into their species. One council member, an elder named Siran, leaned forward, his voice trembling with emotion. You speak with such understanding, yet you are not one of us. How is this possible? Because I am both and neither, the hybrid replied. I am the bridge between your perfection and humanity's resilience. Together, I believe we can create something greater than either of us alone. The council debated furiously, their voices rising and echoing through the chamber. Velrax, standing silently in the corner, finally stepped forward. I was wrong to see this hybrid as a danger, he said, his voice commanding. It has already saved my ship and crew. Perhaps it can save our future as well. A visit to Earth. The next stop was Earth, a stark contrast to Xelera. The planet teemed with life and chaos, a whirlwind of colors, sounds, and emotions. Jack watched as the hybrid marveled at Earth's unpredictability, its voice tinged with awe. "This world is so alive," it said. "Every corner holds a new story, a new emotion. It is beautiful in its imperfection." Jack smiled. "That's Earth for you. Messy, loud, and somehow still standing." When the hybrid addressed Earth's leaders, the response was mixed. Some feared its power, while others saw it as humanity's greatest ally. One diplomat, an older woman with kind eyes, leaned forward. "What do you want from us?" she asked. "To learn," the hybrid replied. "To grow, and to help you grow too." Her gaze softened. "Then perhaps we have more to gain than to fear."